Hi, this is Leslie, and you're listening to The Interview with Leslie Heaney. Colorectal cancer, the disease that claimed the life of Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman at age 43, was once considered an old person's illness. But unfortunately, it no longer is. The National Cancer Institute says early-onset colorectal cancer is now the #1 cause of cancer death in people 20 to 49 years old. So why are Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zers developing a disease that they never would have dreamed of getting not so long ago? To help answer this question, I'm so honored to be joined by Dr. Andrea Cercek, a board-certified medical oncologist who specializes in the treatment of patients with colorectal cancer at Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center. Dr. Cercek is also the founder and co-director of the Center for Young Onset Colorectal and Gastrointestinal Cancer. This clinic, which is dedicated to serving the specific needs of young people under 50 who have these cancers, is the first clinic of its kind in the world. In this episode, I talk with Dr. Cercek about the possible causes for this rise in colorectal cancer among young people, what we can do to reduce our risk of developing colorectal cancer, and about the exciting treatment options that are being developed at Sloan-Kettering to cure colorectal cancer without the often crippling side effects of radiation, chemo, and surgery. One of the beneficiaries of Dr. Cercek's research and treatment is her former patient, Kelly Bonito, who also joins us in this conversation. Kelly was just 29 with an 8-month-old baby when she was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. Thanks to the immunotherapy treatment that Dr. Cercek's team discovered, Kelly is now cancer-free, did not have to have chemo, radiation, or surgery, and has gone on to live a full and healthy life. In this episode, you're going to learn everything that you need to know about colorectal cancer, and you will also get to hear one woman's inspiring story. So with that, here's Dr. Cercek and Kelly Bonito. Dr. Cercek, Kelly, it is so nice to see you both. Thank you so much for joining. This is really exciting to be speaking with both of you about this topic. I thought before we started, it might be helpful for listeners, Dr. Cercek, for you to sort of set the table a bit about the rates of colorectal cancer in the U.S. today.
So it's estimated that about 150,000 individuals will be diagnosed with colorectal cancer this year, and that about 52,000 will die of the disease. And what's even more striking than that is that the rates of young individuals, so individuals under the age of 55 with colorectal cancer, are rising. They've been rising steadily since the mid-1990s. So much so that actually the incidence doubled from 1995 of 11% to actually 20% in 2019. And we're seeing this continuous, slow and steady rise in young individuals for unclear reasons.
And I think, Kelly, that's where I want to turn it over to you, because you are, one of those people, right? You're part of that statistic of a young person who was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. Will you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yes, absolutely. So I was diagnosed at age 28. It was soon after I gave birth to my son. He was 8 months old when I had found out. And I was diagnosed with stage 3 colorectal cancer. At the time, I was actually living in California. And I came back home to New Jersey to get closer to family to help with our newborn. And thank God I did, because I was able to see basically Dr. Cercek at Memorial Sloan-Kettering.
That's amazing. So you're out in California, you have this young baby, and all of us are mothers on this Zoom. So you're exhausted, you don't know which end is up. And what kind of symptoms were you experiencing that led you to go get yourself checked out and diagnosed?
Yeah, so actually when I was 8 months pregnant, I was seeing blood in my stool, and I was also constipated as well. And I brought it up to my doctor, and she had told me, you're about to be a mom, and these are the things that happen right before you're about to be a mom. Things are changing. And of course, I believe that. I've had another baby since then, and I would believe it again. I am not a doctor, so I don't know what's going on. And soon after I had my son, I was a new mom. So I thought those feelings were still true. And I had saw a couple doctors after that as well, in concerns of having blood in my stool still, constipation. And at that point, my symptoms did not progress. So that's exactly what I was dealing with for a few months at that point, and I kept getting dismissed from doctors just telling me that I most likely had internal hemorrhoids. I had one doctor tell me that he was 99.9% sure that I had internal hemorrhoids, and that was not the case. I kept pushing. I kept talking to my friends and family how I wasn't feeling well, and my symptoms got worse. I became not hungry.
Were you feeling fatigued, or what were the other symptoms besides at that point?
It's funny because feeling fatigued, I mean, as a new mom, you're tired, right? So it's hard to tell that difference. But I started to lose my appetite. I would be extremely hungry. I would take a bite of something and I would no longer be hungry. This led to me losing about 7 to 8 pounds, and I weigh about 110 pounds. So that was a lot for me. And there was one morning that I woke up, I went to the bathroom, and you would have thought that it was that time of month, and it was not. And that's where it became extremely alarming.
So then so who were you seeing when you said you were seeing these doctors? You were going to your OBGYN, you're going to a general practitioner?
Both. I saw OBGYN twice. I went as a postpartum checkup. I went again, as I call it, my second postpartum checkup with these concerns. I then went to a primary doctor. Those were on the West Coast. I came to New Jersey. I tried to see another doctor. I had problems with my health insurance because I had moved, so I wasn't working at the time. It was very hard to see a doctor, so I went to a family clinic. Nothing really happened from there. I went to the hospital. Nothing really happened from there. It was all the same answers of most likely having internal hemorrhoids, lay out the spicy foods. A lot of times I'm walking into those appointments with my newborn as well, so it was a straight look at the baby, look at me, I'm young. And then finally, I had one of my friend's moms say, I think this doctor takes your insurance, go check her out. And I did, and it was a primary doctor. I went in with pictures of what was going on in the bathroom. And she said, you need a colonoscopy, don't you? And I was like, yes, I needed one like 2 weeks ago. She was like, no problem, I'll write you that referral, which is exactly what I need. So I went then to a GI that next week. I was able to get a colonoscopy actually that next day because of the time of day I was there, and I already didn't eat much that day. And that was the day that I found out that I had a tumor. That was in January 17th of 2019.
What was that like? Because I've had colonoscopies and they come, the doctor will come in and say, I found polyps, or they'll describe what they saw. Did the doctor come in and say, I saw a mass, or did they at that point just know it was cancer, or did they want to have you have it surgically removed to have it biopsied? What was
He immediately told me that there was a tumor there, but he couldn't tell me if it was cancerous or not because they had to do biopsies. So I went home crying that day, just scared. I knew in my gut that it wasn't good just because of how I've been feeling, how skinny I had looked from all the weight that I'd lost, how much I hadn't been feeling well every day. And I had to wait about 2 weeks to find out that it actually was cancerous.
And then was your next step, because you were in New Jersey at that time, to go directly to Sloan-Kettering, or?
So my next step was, I actually had a fiance at the time. So my next step was, we need to get married, like now, basically for health insurance. He's a teacher, and it was the right move for us. So we were pushing for a marriage at that point. And I have a very, very supportive family, very supportive mom. She's been with me through this whole entire journey. And she asked a lot of friends, did a lot of research on what to do next. And the plan was to see 3 cancer hospitals. And really it was about comfort, what we were going to hear, the response from the doctor, what the plan was going to be, and if we felt it was right. And we ended up going to Memorial Sloan-Kettering. That was our first stop shop. And it crossed off all the things that we were looking for. However, my treatment at the time, that I was told it was supposed to be chemotherapy, oral chemo and radiation, and then surgery. And that would have left me to having a colostomy bag for the rest of my life. And I was also told that I most likely would never be able to carry a baby again.
Oh my gosh, I can't imagine. And you're 29 at this point, I
was 28 still.
So then how did you find the incredible Dr. Cercek? How did you two get connected, and what happened next?
So after that, it was, to be quite honest with you, a blur. I then went the process of freezing eggs to create embryos, because at that point we thought we would have to go through having a surrogate. And then it was multiple scans from there and just waiting to start treatment. And my treatment plan was about to start. Luckily for me, there's a hub of Memorial Sloan-Kettering in Middletown, New Jersey, so I didn't have to go back and forth to New York. Very lucky and grateful for that. And at that point, I was at my appointment just to set the treatment date. And I had a research nurse come in, and she said, we might have another opportunity for you. Would you like to hear it? And my mom and I were like, yeah, absolutely. So she laid out everything that they knew at the time for the clinical trial. And she had told me that if I were to go on it, I would be the 4th person in the country to go on it. They don't really know a lot of research besides what they had already seen with the 3 other people prior. And at that time, I didn't know much about what was going on with those 3 people. And my mom and I looked at each other and we said, what do we have to lose? So we opted for it. And then at that point, I started my first treatment at Memorial Sloan-Kettering. And it was a 30-minute treatment. I did have a port. And I didn't have any side effects. By my 4th treatment, my tumor had halfway disappeared. And by my 9th treatment, my tumor had completely disappeared. And I met Dr. Cercek soon after that.
You said the research assistant came in to talk to you about the opportunity. Was that she was explaining to you that if these other 3 patients had such success with this trial that they didn't need the surgery that you were talking about earlier? Is that why it was so compelling to you? Or what was it about it that was so that you said, we're definitely going to do this versus the original plan that you had?
To be quite honest with you, these symptoms, the side effects, sounded a lot less harsh than the original treatment plan A. That was the only thing that we had going for us at that point that we were hoping for.
So, Dr. Cercek, I'm assuming these other 3 patients might have been yours since it was your clinical trial. Tell us about this. You've spoken at an event that I was at about it, and it's an absolutely miraculous what this course of treatment has been able to do for people. And Kelly, of course, is one of them. Will you speak a little bit about it and what that clinical trial is about and the results that you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So Kelly was eligible for this study because her tumor had a mutation or a change called mismatch repair deficiency. And basically what that means is that the tumor sort of had a lot of these flags or a lot of proteins that made her immune system already interested in attacking the tumor. And that's about 5% of all patients with early stage rectal cancer that have this mutation in the tumor. And it could be either genetic or it can happen randomly, which is what happened in Kelly's case. So we knew because of that change in her tumor that we saw in pathology that she was eligible for this study. And at the time, I have to say, Kelly was incredibly brave because we didn't know these responses. We know now, and after her and several other patients, when we started seeing these amazing responses over and over, then it was a much easier conversation to have with patients about the trial because we said, look, so far everybody, is incredibly sensitive to this. The tumors are just disappearing. But for Kelly, as she said, we didn't know that. We didn't even, the patients that were before her were just a couple months before her. So we didn't really know, how sensitive these tumors would be. But, she took a chance and it was incredibly, incredibly brave and amazing, really, that she did that. So thank you for that, Kelly. Obviously, the outcome was incredible. But that's the process with clinical trials is that we don't always know. And what Kelly mentioned in terms of the standard treatment is what we offer everybody else, the other 95% of our patients. And, even her story from symptoms to diagnosis, unfortunately, we hear it over and over in our young patients. They're dismissed. They're too busy to bring it to anyone's attention. Maybe they're told to come back and they don't come back, or they're told to follow up with a different physician. Just like Kelly did, show up to the emergency room. Oh, it's a hemorrhoid. You're okay. You're not bleeding that much. Your hemoglobin is stable for months and months and months until they're finally diagnosed. And so, as a separate issue, almost just raising awareness is so incredibly important. But in Kelly's case with the trial, I think this was, an opportunity. We wanted to do it because we knew that in advanced disease, these types of tumors that are mismatch repair deficient, or what's called MSI, were very sensitive to immunotherapy. But that was in the metastatic setting. Patients had good responses. But what we wanted to see is how well could we treat the tumor with just immunotherapy to start? Could we get away with using just immunotherapy to replace all the standard treatments that Kelly would have otherwise needed, including chemo, the chemo radiation, and the surgery? And that's what we were able to do for Kelly and many other patients as well. So it's been really amazing.
So exciting. And when you start out with a patient, it sounds like you do kind of test the tumor, or in this case you did with her, to see if she would be eligible for the trial, even before she was approached by the research assistant?
Yes, exactly. So in cancer in general, and especially in colorectal cancer, there are certain tests that we do routinely on tumors because they matter for treatment decisions. So for advanced disease, everybody was getting this testing called mismatch repair deficient testing. In early stage disease, we do it as well in colorectal cancer, but that's because many of these tumors that are mismatch repair deficient are associated with the hereditary syndrome called Lynch syndrome. So that's been a standard to test, irrespective of this trial. We were testing, everyone. And so Kelly had that test on autopilot, and when it came back positive, prior to the study, we wouldn't have done anything different except sent her to genetics to get tested to see if she had Lynch syndrome. But again, not everyone does. Some people, it occurs randomly. But now that we had this trial, we knew that she was eligible for the trial. And so there's several what we call biomarkers that we can test this way, either in advanced stage 4 disease or also in early stage disease for clinical trials.
So exciting. And I know, I want to talk a lot about sort of this uptick that you're seeing in younger patients like Kelly, because Kelly, in your experience, you're talking about you keep going to the doctor, and of course, they're looking at the most obvious, reason for your symptoms, right? It's that you're a new mother. It could be hemorrhoids. It could be all these things that would be logical, right? And not thinking about colorectal cancer as being one of the possibilities of what's causing these symptoms. But what are the kind of the other symptoms beside, or are there no other? Do we hit all of them, Dr. Cercek, that people should be looking for, younger patients should be looking for, beyond the fatigue and the rectal bleeding?
No, I mean, most commonly these tumors occur in young individuals, occur on what we call the left side or the descending colon or the rectum, just like Kelly's, for reasons that we don't know. This is actually occurring all over the world. So when the tumor is in that part of the large intestine, sort of towards the end, before it exits, through the anus, the stool exits, the stool is very formed already. It's not watery. The water is reabsorbed. So most commonly, patients develop rectal bleeding, bright red blood, just like Kelly mentioned, pain with bowel movements or really bad constipation, and then abdominal pain. But those are not the only symptoms. So weight loss can happen, fatigue that's kind of unexplained, sort of more extreme fatigue, lack of appetite, like anorexia, all of these issues can occur. So what we really say is any persistent symptoms that last more than a few days should be checked out. It's very possible that it's, something else, that maybe it's just a stomach bug. But if it's ongoing like this, it really requires medical attention.
Well, it sounds like, you had started getting your symptoms, Kelly, while you were pregnant. So from the time of your first symptom, or the first symptom that you really noticed, right, whether it was rectal bleeding or the constipation, it was almost a year. Am I right in my math, before you were diagnosed?
Yeah, pretty much. It was probably a little bit under a year, yeah.
So we talked about, just sort of this trend of younger people developing colorectal cancer. I know this is a big focus of your research, Dr. Cercek, and the research of others in this space. What are you attributing this rise to, or what areas are you investigating?
So we believe that this is something environmental, but what it is, no one knows. And every area that you can imagine is being investigated, from, changes in our lifestyle, being more sedentary, less active, to things that we're exposed to in the environment, from microplastics, hormones in our diet and the animal meat that we eat, to things that we might be ingesting, such as medications, including antibiotics, and how these changes affect our organs, or what's called the microbiome, which is the intestinal flora that, we coexist with, because we know that there are these kind of good bacteria and bad bacteria, and bacteria that can lead to more inflammation that could potentially lead to cancer formation. So all of these areas are being investigated, throughout the world, really, at this point.
The thing about the diet piece, which makes great sense, right? That the Americans, eating a lot of processed food, not having as much of a healthy diet, that would have an effect on the microbiome. And I know that's where there's a lot of that research looking at the connection between microbiome and developing cancer. But are other parts of the world seeing this rise at the same rate as we are here in the United States? And how are they parsing that out?
That's the scariest piece of all, is that they are. And initially, the data was really coming from countries with high socioeconomic, backgrounds. But now it is really every country that has a registry or has the capability of putting together a registry is noticing this. And it's completely a worldwide phenomenon, from Europe, Australia, Asia, Latin America, Mexico, as well as Africa. I mean, it's really happening all over the world. And so that's why we believe that it's some, environmental exposure that is throughout and not necessarily associated with a particular diet or a particular, pesticide that's only used in a certain area or something like that, but must be something much more global
and universal, which is why the microplastics piece is something that does affect the whole world, right? Can we talk a little bit about risk factors for people for developing colon cancer? Who should be, and I guess we're just talking about the fact it could be anyone, right? It could be somebody who's a healthy young woman like Kelly, but are there genetic factors? Are there other dietary factors or things that people should avoid to sort of lessen their chance of developing colorectal cancer?
Yeah, so absolutely. Traditionally, the risk factors that sort of were studied and applied to what we call average onset patients or patients in their 60s, 70s, and 80s are things like diets high in red meat, smoking, alcohol consumption, obesity. But that doesn't really apply when someone is 27 and fit, or, in their, you can see teenagers now, and it's rare, but it's happening. And so you really can't explain that with any kind of lifestyle choice, that the individual makes. And when we look at sort of the obesity has been rising in the United States, that's well documented, but kind of the slopes of the curve sort of run in parallel. And so it's not that we can clearly say obesity came first and then colorectal cancer in our young patients. And then moreover, when we look at our young patients and we ask them, we have these extensive risk factor questionnaires, at our center as well as others. They were never obese. They were active. It just they don't quite fit any of those risk factors. But an important point is this hereditary, risk factor and family history, because we do see a higher rate of a family history, but that's not necessarily associated with a hereditary predisposition. So when we look at their testing, their genetic testing, they're not, it's not like we found a new genetic mutation or that we're seeing more of these young patients having a genetic predisposition. What's rising are really the random cases, or what we call the sporadic cases.
Is there a gene, though, that you've been able to identify, like there is with breast cancer with the BRCA gene, or it's more just based on family history when you're talking about the genetic risk factor?
In general, in colorectal cancer, there definitely are genes that predispose that have been known. And so younger patients, there's a larger proportion of younger patients with colorectal cancer that have Lynch syndrome or familial polyposis, what's called FAP. So there are definitely certain genetic mutations, just like the breast cancer BRCA, associated with breast cancer, that are associated with colorectal cancer, for sure. So all young patients need to be tested. But the issue really is that the chunk of that pie where we don't find any genetic mutation is the part that's rising, if that makes sense. So it's the patients where we don't find any genes, nothing that they've inherited or potentially passed down. It seems completely random. It seems just like they were 70 years old, but they're, 30, 35, or 28. And we don't know why.
Kelly, you're part of that group too, right? You're the part of that piece of the pie that didn't have any risk factor that you could identify. I mean, you're healthy. You're very trim. I mean, describing it, I don't think I've seen 120 pounds since, or whatever you said you were, since, I mean, you're very trim, you're very fit, you're just a very healthy young woman who would not, you would not think would be at risk of developing colorectal cancer. So that is, to your point, Dr. Cercek, so incredibly alarming. So Kelly, you talked about, they talked to you about your treatment, and the surgery was because Kelly's tumor was reacting so well and shrinking in response to her clinical trial protocol that she ended up not having to have the surgery, or did you also have surgery as well?
I did not have surgery. I also did not have radiation.
That's amazing.
It is.
That is so amazing. I mean, so Dr. Cercek, is what Kelly was describing, sort of surgery and then chemotherapy or radiation, is that a common treatment protocol? I know there are a lot of side effects. Kelly talked about one, the doctor telling her she probably wouldn't be able to carry children. What does that look like?
Yeah, so the typical treatment for rectal cancer, because the rectum is located in the pelvis, it's the end of the large intestine, the treatment is to do chemotherapy and chemoradiation first and then surgery. So that's different than colon cancer, which is outside of the pelvis, in the belly, where we do surgery and then we look under the microscope to see if patients need chemo or don't need chemo, depending on how advanced, what stage the tumor is pathologically under the microscope. For rectal cancer, we stage it with an MRI and we say, okay, this is stage 2 or 3. Everybody gets the chemoradiation, the chemo, and then the surgery. And that's the standard protocol. It was for all patients. Now patients that are mismatch repair deficient because of the trial can get immunotherapy. But prior to this, exactly as Kelly was described, that was appropriate care with curative intent, meaning this is how we get rid of it. But because of the tumor being in the pelvis, you do need the radiation and you do need the surgery. And so for tumors that are low down, where they're not able to resect the tumor and reattach the colon, about 30% of people with rectal cancer need a permanent colostomy or a permanent bag. So are not able to be reattached. And this is true for men and women. When the tumor is in the rectum, radiation is part of the treatment, and radiation targets the tumor, but it also affects the surrounding structure. So the vagina is in the way, the uterus is in the way. In case of young women, of course, the ovaries are in the way. And so radiation, if everything is left in the pelvis, leads to immediate menopause. And then it scars the uterus. And so women can't carry a baby to term because the uterus is not able to do its normal function, which is essentially swell with blood and grow, with the fetus. And so those are the issues is early menopause and infertility, particularly in women, but also in men with radiation and surgery can lead to infertility as well.
And there's so many other lifestyle effects, right? In terms of incontinence, I think was one, and sexual dysfunction. I remember you mentioning that when you were speaking.
Absolutely, because of all the, vital sexual organs that are in the way for both men and women. And for women, the vaginal canal is affected with the radiation. It leads to dryness and scarring potentially. And so the tumors are eradicated. We can, cure patients, but there are a lot of toxicities from our treatment and survivorship.
So Kelly, with your immunotherapy treatment, were your side effects mild besides sort of, fatigue and things like that? Or did you?
It's so funny. Again, as a new mom going through treatments, I couldn't tell a difference if I was receiving fatigue from being a new mom or from immunotherapy. But besides that, I did not have any other side effects.
That's just so incredible. And I know, Dr. Cercek, that at Sloan-Kettering, you do so much, to try to mitigate and advise patients on how best to navigate those side effects.
We do. I mean, we try very hard, with early intervention, and that's one of the goals of our young onset center as well, is the, physical support with fertility, sexual health, integrative medicine, nutrition, but then also the social support, psychological support to kind of help empower people and prepare patients for the entire treatment, process, as well as then life and survivorship with some of the potential toxicities that they may have.
Yeah, will you talk about that? I don't want to get the title right. Is it the Early Onset Center?
It's long, yeah. So it's the Young Onset Center for Colorectal and Gastrointestinal Cancers. And we added the gastrointestinal piece actually a few years after it opened. We opened initially in March of 2018 for colorectal cancer patients only because of the statistics that we discussed early, where it was clearly described that we were seeing more and more young patients with colorectal cancer. We wanted to help them navigate treatment. We wanted to help them in survivorship. We realized that their needs were very unique. and different than the patients we were used to treating that's, had established careers, had finished supporting their families, or had more support, or just in very different places in their life than our 20, 30, and 40-year-olds that were starting their careers or, raising a young family, helping sometimes their elderly parents financially. So all of those toxicities were much more significant for young patients, as well as fertility, family planning, et cetera. So one of the main goals of the center was to focus on that and really help our patients navigate and have access to all of these services that were available at MSK under one center. And then the other focus was, of course, was research. And we have a prospective registry. We collect stool, we collect risk factor questionnaires, tissue for analyses, blood, to kind of try to figure out why this is happening, ask questions like, what do the tumors look like? Are they different? What is the biology of this disease? And what can we learn from it, both from the initial diagnosis and then all the way through treatment, and then also in survivorship in patients that are getting subsequent colonoscopies. And then, as I mentioned, we, now more and more reports are coming out that this is not unique. The young onset rise is not unique just to colorectal cancer. We're seeing it throughout the entire intestinal tract. And so we actually expanded the center in 2020 to include all of gastrointestinal tumors, so appendix cancer and stomach cancer and esophagus, et cetera, can also receive the support that we provide and are also included in our research protocols.
That's a unique center, right? A unique service that Sloan-Kettering provides.
Yeah, so we were actually the first in the world to open a dedicated center like this. And then since then, actually, several centers have followed suit throughout the US and actually internationally as well, where we've helped to advise how to structure it and then also partnered with them for research questions. So that's been really amazing and, very rewarding sort of as a researcher, but then also for patients to be able to have that support and that access at places outside of MSK.
Yeah, I would think, one of the great things about having this center or having that resource is that you're able to, for those that are interested, like our daughter had a chronic kidney condition and had some surgeries when she was a baby. And I remember all I wanted to do was speak to another family that was going through the same thing to kind of get some understanding what was to come and to get some support. So having that must be a really strong component of the services that you offer, just a real safe haven for your patients, Dr. Cercek, to know that if they want to talk to someone else who's going through it, or teenagers or young adults in their 20s and 30s to talk about their shared experience of all the things you mentioned, kind of balancing young careers, young families, all these things that people in their 20s and 30s navigate, and then to pile, colorectal cancer or rectal cancer, or colon cancer on top of it is a lot. So that's terrific that resource is available to them.
Thank you. Yeah, and we've learned everyone's different. Obviously, not everyone benefits from a group, discussion, or some people like to find connections through social media. Other people are much more private, like Kelly said, and prefer one-on-one. And so we try to be mindful of that and kind of offer, all those potential opportunities. And then we also have a social worker that does reach out to each patient. Not everyone, continues the relationship, but she's available for them if needed. And I think that's one of the things patients have found most beneficial, actually, because then she could also make connections, as they go through therapy, because then everyone kind of processes what they're going through and what they're dealing with at different times in different ways. And so we just kind of remain available, throughout the journey.
Right, which is so terrific to know that the resource is there. We all, I think, as humans, we want to connect something with something else. We want to say, well, okay, I didn't eat well, or I know I smoked too much and then I got lung cancer. It's so terrifying that we're in this space here that we really can't figure out or attribute, the cause, right, of why these younger people are getting colorectal cancer. But are there things, practices or lifestyle choices that we can make to help reduce our risk of developing it or being diagnosed with a later stage colon cancer?
I think, the best we can do at this point is obviously a healthy lifestyle, healthy diet, exercise that we should all kind of be adhering to for multiple health reasons, not just colorectal cancer, especially at this young age, I think, because there's not clearly anything, that we should or shouldn't be doing. But absolutely, if any symptoms develop, just be your own advocate and seek medical attention. I mean, that's really the most important thing to do, because The thing about colorectal cancer, at least, is that it is preventable if caught early. And so if it just develops into a polyp, we catch that polyp and could remove the polyp. So definitely people of screening age, which is 45 now, if you've not gotten your colonoscopies, absolutely need to go. And that's, sort of the optimal screening that we can do for now. We will have better screening in the future, less invasive screening. And obviously our goal from a research perspective is to figure out in this young population, like who is at risk and why, and then screen those patients much, much younger. But until we can do that, those are really the main things that we can focus on.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You mentioned the 45 age recommendation. I don't think a lot of people know that has been dropped from 50 to 45. There should be more public service announcements around it. Are all insurance companies, to your knowledge, that has become the standard that they will cover at 45?
Yeah.
This is just anecdotal of speaking with friends about, I said, I was told 45 and no, I thought it's 50. And I don't think there's great public awareness of 45 being the new date. And that, as you talk about the trend of younger people developing the disease, that might continue to go down even further than 45.
Yes, potentially. Yes, absolutely. The incidence rises. Yeah.
What are the percentage rates of those that are diagnosed with colorectal cancer in the 45 and above group?
Most are still older, right? Most are still much older. So about 20% of the entire group are under 55. So, and of those, the majority would be between 40 to 55, and then a much smaller number, are under 40. The concern really is, though, that it's rising. And what's happening is that by 2030, 25% or 1 in 4 of all patients with rectal cancer are going to be under 50. And then 1 in 10 of all patients with colon cancer are going to be under 50. So the numbers are going to, increase. So while they're still low, and that's the issue, right, with screening and sort of expanding screening to everybody, is that we just can't do it economically. It doesn't make sense because there's way too many number of individuals that would need to be screened, but the rates are rising. And so eventually we'll find ourselves, in this predicament where the age will continue to decrease. There's already been a shift towards younger from the median age from 68 to 66 in the US, and that's, predicted to continue to decline as we're seeing more and more young people.
Let's talk a little bit about screenings, because all screenings are not created equal. And there are a lot of these kits, these sort of take-home kits. And I have a young woman that works with me whose mother's around my age, and which is horrifying that I just said that I work with someone who actually, his mom's around my age. But she was saying, that her mom did the kit and that, you don't need to, because I was talking about scheduling that colonoscopy. But the kit doesn't give you the full picture, right? Am I right about that? And can you talk a little bit about that? In what instances is that a good step?
You're absolutely right. So colonoscopy is the gold standard because colonoscopy enables us to visualize everything, right? And catch that polyp and remove the polyp early, diagnose the cancer if it's present. So that's why it's the most important, because you can diagnose, but you can also intervene with the colonoscopy. The issue with the kits is they're good, but sometimes they can be falsely reassuring. So they're good in the sense that, they're fairly accurate in detecting blood, but once there's blood, there's very likely to be a cancer. Polyps can bleed, but more likely there's something more, invasive that's going on. Of course, unless it's, hemorrhoids or something like that. But if the bleeding's from the cancer, then you see the blood, and then the next step from one of those tests from the kits is to go and get the colonoscopy. If it's negative, that doesn't mean that there's no polyp there that in a few years, however long, may develop into a cancer. And so that's the problem, is that opportunity might be missed, and that the individual, it seems like your coworker's mom might potentially be falsely reassured that everything is great because the result was negative.
So what you want to do is you want to catch the polyp before the polyp turns into something.
Exactly.
And when you have your colonoscopy, if they do find a polyp, they just remove it right there, right? So it's sort of like a one-stop shop, I guess.
And then, they look at it under the microscope and they know how advanced it is and if it needs to any more interventions, or if you're good to go, and then they tell you to come back in 5 years or later even sometimes.
So your recommendation is that if you're 45 and over, you're getting your colonoscopy. How often are you getting it, or should you be?
So with any family history, it should be at 45. And then depending on the results of that colonoscopy, people are advised, if it's completely clean, could be 10 years. If there are some concerns, it just depends on what they find. And then there's a recommendation for the, intervals to come back. Sometimes it depends on how good the visualization of the colon was, the prep, et cetera. And so there's some, potential kind of details that are discussed with the gastroenterologist after the colonoscopy, but definitely the first one should be at 45. Or unless there's a family history, I should say, unless of course there's a genetic predisposition or a family history, in which case then it may be younger depending on the case.
Is there any scenario where you see the kits playing a role?
I mean, I think they're helpful if someone, for whatever reason is reluctant to go get a colonoscopy for a number of reasons, then okay, that's better than doing nothing. And I think eventually the detection is going to be much better to where we'll be able to rely on a blood test, or a kit of some sort to detect even very, very early changes, but we're just not there yet with the technology.
I asked that question because I was thinking, would there ever be for younger patients, would that be a first step? But it sounds like you're saying if you're experiencing bleeding from your rectum, and it's persistent and all the other things we've talked about, you really want to go get the colonoscopy at that point, because that could be an indicator that you don't just have a polyp, that you have a cancer.
Exactly.
Okay, so you have your colonoscopy, they discover cancer, and Kelly, I don't know if it was your mom or your family friend, or you were saying really kind of was so incredible and diligent about setting out a plan for you to go meet with 3 different centers, and you went to Sloan-Kettering, and it's like trying on that wedding dress. The first one is, just fits, right? And it had everything that you were looking for, and you felt so comfortable with them and their protocol and their expertise. So, but in your experience, what should someone do? What is their first step? You get this diagnosis from your biopsy. Kelly kind of sort of has, in my mind, like the best plan, right, to get the second opinions. But what would you tell a family friend or someone who came to you and said, I just got this diagnosis, besides obviously the obvious if you're living in New York, which would be to go right to you. But for listeners that are all, we have listeners all over the country, what should their first step be?
No, I do think it's an important question, because often people with good intentions want to go to multiple places and think about it and see, and sometimes that can delay care and lead to worse symptoms, et cetera, if it takes a long time to get in for appointments. So I think the first step should be, and it's what Kelly did, is really, you get the diagnosis, you see, sometimes it's the gastroenterologist that will say, okay, this is the place that I refer to, go see such and such a doctor and just get plugged in. And then from there, you get a sense of really what you're up against, what the stage might be, what the treatment offered might be, and then kind of say, okay, I want to get that second opinion, and I want to see if there's something else out there, oftentimes in discussion with the doctor, because I think most physicians, most oncologists at smaller community centers are aware that there's trials going on and that there's an interest in general for, improvements in treatment, et cetera, and would refer patients. But I think it is important to get plugged in as soon as possible, and then see if, depending on the situation, to get that second or third opinion.
I think that just makes great sense. I have a very close friend who was diagnosed with colon cancer in her 30s and was thinking about going to a hospital kind of closer to them, and they ended up coming to Sloan-Kettering, and she's cancer-free and she had a great outcome. But what the doctor had told her at this other hospital is similar, Kelly, to what you'd been sort of told about sort of catastrophic kind of life-changing side effects. And Sloan-Kettering was able to, treat her cancer without having her to have, some of the more dramatic side effects that we talked about of having a colostomy bag. And obviously that might be, the only course for someone that is in a certain circumstance and goes to whatever hospital it may be. But it's good to get that second opinion so you sort of have a better understanding of what your options are. And Kelly, you, in your case, what was so great is that you were able to go to the Sloan-Kettering's outpost in New Jersey. But even if someone is living anywhere in the country and they're near a cancer center that perhaps specializes in colorectal cancer or wants to come to Sloan-Kettering or any other world-renowned cancer center, they can do that and then have their protocol administered, I think, with their doctor or their hospital locally. Is that right, Dr. Cercek? And do you have patients that live outside and come to you? And
absolutely, yeah. There's various versions of that, right? Of the collaboration, whether even if they're not able to receive care with us, we do have several regional, centers where we can offer care through MSK. That's much closer to people's homes, such as the one in New Jersey where Kelly received her care. But even if not, then we often kind of can work with the local team and sort of, help guide the treatment or help guide at the time of the decision making and see patients only at that time. So there's various ways that we can work with someone. And, I always tell patients, like, once you come to us, you're considered our patient. You can always come back to me for any questions, any, decision points or things like that. And we often, work together with their medical oncologists, texting or through email and check-ins to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page and help guide their care. So Kelly, you went through your treatment. Tell me about that moment. Was there a final scan that you had or Dr. Cercek, you were her doctor at that point, I think. Did you sort of said the tumor, it's gone? Or what was that like and when did that happen?
So after I had my last sigmoidoscopy with my treatments, because I still get them now, that was really when it was the teller of your tumor is not there. It had completely disappeared. I then got the call a couple of days later that the biopsies came back with nothing of sign of cancer. And really that was the teller for me. And then once I was told that I didn't have to go through radiation, that was the huge celebration because in my eyes, I was able to then have another baby.
That's so incredible. I mean, what does that celebration even look like? You must have relief doesn't even come to describe it, right? How you must have felt.
It was very surreal. It still doesn't feel real.
And so how soon after that did you then decide that you were going to try to have another baby?
Yeah, so I decided right there and then that I wanted to have another baby. However, my doctors had advised me to wait at least 2 years because if anything were to happen, it likely would come back within those 2 years. It was a higher chance of that happening. So hearing that news really broke me because that was a question that I was having almost every time I went and saw my doctor in Middletown. And I'm sure she was sick of me asking, when can I have another baby? When can I have another baby? And to be quite honest with you, those 2 years were vital for me because that is really when it hit me on what I really had just went through. I had a lot of panic attacks, a lot of anxiety attacks. I really didn't know who I was at that point. I became a new mom and a cancer survivor all around the same time.
Yeah.
So it was a very hard couple of years for me. It was time that I really needed for myself. And then after those 2 years, I was able to get pregnant and I did. So I now have a baby girl and she's 1 now. And I'm actually pregnant with my 3rd right now.
Oh, stop it. Oh my gosh, Kelly, congratulations.
Thank you.
That is so awesome. And without getting too personal, did you use your embryos from the IVF or was it a natural with your?
So for my second, we did use our embryos and we chose to have a girl. And this 3rd one, we went all natural. So we felt more confident this time around being able to do that.
That is so incredible, though, that you're able to do that after having this experience.
It's absolutely unreal.
Oh, my gosh. That is just how satisfying to Dr. Cercek and just, I just, to be in your shoes, to see just how your research and your work has making such incredible difference in people's lives and saving people's lives and creating new lives. And it's just really, really amazing. That research, that original research that led to the clinical trial that Kelly was a part of, I think was part of the societies. Did the Society of MSK help fund that research, that initial clinical trial research?
It did in part, yes. I received very, generous support from the society a few years back, sort of at the start of this research, and as well as the Young Onset Center.
And now you're working on some new research. Do you want to talk about your new research initiative, or both the one you've got one I know with the society and with the society's campaign this year, but I'm sure you've got multiple pots on your stove there at the, in different projects.
Obviously, the results of this study and Kelly's journey has been incredible, and we want to do that for all of our patients, right? So that's the ultimate goal. So with rectal cancer in particular, we have several studies that are ongoing, trying to kind of optimize this biomarker-directed approach, right? So what other treatments could we use for early stage disease to really get those tumors to go away without needing to do radiation and without needing to do surgery? So that's something that we're working on from biomarkers. We have what's called a HER2, which is more commonly heard of in breast cancer or in stomach cancer, but that mutation exists in colon cancer and rectal cancer as well. So we're targeting that on a trial. And then we have another study that will be coming out with a immunotherapy, but for patients that don't have this mismatch repair deficient mutation that Kelly's tumor has. So it's for the other 95% of patients, but with a combination of immunotherapy that we hope would be able to kind of really stimulate the immune system and hopefully get similar responses to what we saw on this mismatch repair deficient rectal cancer study as well. So that will be opening soon. And then we've expanded the trial that Kelly was on to all tumors that are mismatch repair deficient. So including like stomach, GU, like urothelial, GYN cancers, as well as hepatobiliary cancers that have that genetic mutation, to see if we're able to do the same thing where we just give the immunotherapy and potentially patients don't need surgery, which is huge because a lot of those surgeries are very morbid. If you can imagine someone needs to have their stomach removed, they're never eating the same, they're never the same, or some of these liver surgeries aren't even doable because of the location of the tumor. And we're actually putting those data together now. The study's been ongoing. We have over 100 patients now in both groups, the rectal and then all the other solid tumors. So we're going to have that data out soon. And then what's very exciting is that the study that Kelly was on, there was a global study, what's called a registration study for the FDA, that was actually opened throughout the world. It was led by GSK, who owns the drug called dostarlimab, but we're very heavily involved, and it's been now actually open throughout the world, and they've actually enrolled enough patients. And so now the data are maturing, and we'll hopefully be able to get not only FDA approval, in the United States, but also in Europe and elsewhere to be able to offer this treatment to all rectal cancer patients with mismatch repair deficiency, which will be amazing. So that's kind of the rectal cancer research program. And then we're doing other studies and other sort of smaller studies focused on early onset colorectal cancer, trying to see, why this is happening on a smaller sort of intestinal level, not a larger like epidemiologic question, because that's obviously beyond what we can do as a single center, but sort of looking at our patients, looking at their tumors, looking at their polyps. Once they're cured from their cancer, they still form polyps. And so all of these things are now being actively analyzed to see if we might find some commonality or some, signature that could kind of give us a clue as to why these people developed cancer so young.
How many researchers do you have, Dr. Cercek, on your team? And is there any kind, and I guess it's a tough question to answer because each of the different projects you're working on is different, but do you have any visibility into how long you think some of this work will take to kind of get some of these answers?
I mean, I think the big picture one, I think, will take a long time. And most importantly, it's going to take really just, high numbers of patients, right? So that's like the kind of epidemiologic question where it shouldn't be just New York City or even just the US, but kind of a global question. And we're actively participating in that. And hopefully that will get us some answers. The projects that we're doing are much more sort of focused, where we say, okay, let's look at the mutations in the tumor. Let's look at any changes in the intestine. Do we find anything? And then that will lead us, to the next step. So I think some of these projects that I named are going to be, a couple of years, and we should have the answers. We have a number of research assistants that obviously help us with the samples, help us with the data collection. It's really a huge team, because we have analysts that help then, look at the genetic mutations and analyze those. We work with a lot of translational scientists, some basic scientists for some of the questions. And so it's definitely kind of a, far-reaching projects really across multiple areas at MSK to help working together.
Right, you bring in all those experts and reinforcement that are there too at the hospital. So the society campaign that you're involved with, and the society board is helping to raise money to fund. How is that research initiative different from other trials that you've done?
That's huge, because it's funding specifically the Young Onset Center, and then a number of initiatives that we have, and a number of studies that we're doing through the center. So for trials, for example, oftentimes we have money from the pharmaceutical company to support the trial, but then we need funding support for some of the science behind it, some of the correlative analyses, which are now also ongoing from the trial that Kelly was on, as well as our other trials. And so we get some funding for that from grants, but really that's where the philanthropic support is so key in order to generate these data. And, some of the projects that I named, where we're looking at the samples, we have to look at the pathology, we have to do certain stains, we have to do certain analyses. All of that is actually quite expensive to do, and we can't really generate any data without the philanthropic support. So the society funding, that we're incredibly grateful and excited about, will extend to all of that. It's going to cover the science, but then also the infrastructure of our center, which we're also looking to expand, both from a research support perspective, but then also for our patient support. Because just to give you an idea of numbers, since we've expanded now to colorectal and then all other gastrointestinal tumors, we see about 1,000 new patients under the age of 50 a year. And so these are all patients that we want to help support, that we want to opt for these services to. And then we're also interested in doing more educational series, more webinars, and then outreach into communities where there may not be as much awareness. As you mentioned, the screening now is 45, and to kind of spread the word as well. So all of that requires funding in order to be able to run.
How lucky we all are, Dr. Cercek, to have you leading that charge and on the front lines. And Kelly, how fortunate we are to hear your story. I mean, it's just such a beautiful, beautiful ending, and just a great testament to the medical care you received at Sloan-Kettering, but also just a, really uplifting, incredible story. I just hope and I'm just thrilled for you. It's a really wonderful, wonderful thing. The miracle of medicine, and to see you, I've actually heard about you. I've heard about you from, as a patient, being described, but it's just such a honor to get to meet you. And I'm so thrilled about your new news and your wonderful family. But it's such incredible work, Dr. Cercek, that you're doing. We have living proof of that here, and just very grateful to you both for sharing the work that you're doing, Dr. Cercek, and Kelly for sharing your story. So thank you both. That brings us to the end of this episode of The Interview. A huge thank you to Dr. Cercek and Kelly Bonito for joining. And as always, thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We release a new episode every Wednesday. And until then, this is Leslie Heaney, and thank you for joining The Interview.